Chassidus and music class, a short class, half an hour, and then maybe followed in a separate stream by some live music. So last week we started a new mimer, a new discourse. Give a little introduction there. We won't rehash the whole thing, just maybe summarize, but if you want to go to the source, go to soundheitsrecords.com/events. You'll be able to find, if you're watching live, find the source there. If you're watching later, go to Soundheights, go to the soundheights.com and the classes, Chassidus and music classes section. This is class number 18. So we're titling it "When Reality is Beyond." So this is all kind of a similar theme. Many different themes are tied in here, and we'll get back into it. This is a condensed version of a longer discourse by the Alter Rebbe Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi. That's very, very fundamental concept in Chassidus in general, particularly Chassidus in music, because music is the fundamental, the key piece of this puzzle, of a transformation that needs to occur, that occurs all the time in the nature of the growth within this world. That the nature of this world is in many ways determined by music, which is kind of a mysterious thing when you kind of start to think about it. That the Alter Rebbe is making a very, very bold statement that everything hinges on music. Every dimension of growth or elevation or transformation requires music. So something to really think about. This is one of the fundamental concepts of Chassidus and music. So we're just to recap a couple of the pieces of the puzzle we have here. So number one is the verse from Bereshis, from Genesis. In the beginning of the Torah, after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, there's a list of generations. One of the individuals who are a short story is told about, an individual named Lemech, right? He had two wives, right? Ada and Sila, right? Rashi famously explains that back then the custom was for a man to have more than one wife for different purposes. So let's say you had a wife, a person would have a wife for procreation, and then one would have a wife that was not for procreation. She was given some kind of potion that was made her infertile, so she would stay young and beautiful. And the other wife was allowed. It was kind of this kind of twisted dynamic of these two dynamics of women, which was later, we learn in various sources, was repaired by Leah and Rachel, because they also fulfilled these kind of two roles. One was primarily giving birth, and one was primarily an object of attraction and affection. Though Rachel davened very strongly that she should also be able to give birth. And Leah, who gave birth very prodigiously, she davened that her husband should love her, because it was considered this woman who was the one who gave birth was the kind of despised one, the one that was not considered as attractive. She was allowed to obviously go through her childbearing years, whereas the other one was, Yafis Torah Yafis Mara, meant to remain beautiful. So it's a very deep connection and parallel between Adav and Sila and Rachel and Leah. And why are these women important? I mean, we don't mention this in the beginning of the mimer. In the original mimer, actually starts out with Selet Ada, that Ada gave birth to these two brothers, Yaval and Yuval, right? The father of Yaval who haya Avi Yoshif El Mikne. Yaval was the father of those who dwelled in tents and raised cattle, and Yuval, V'shem Achiv Yuval who haya Avi Kol Tofes Kinu V'Ugav, and Yuval was the father of instrumental music, those who grasped harps and flutes. So that was Yaval and Yuval, and they were the sons of Ada, the wife of Lemech, the wife that was meant for procreation. Now, Lemech's other wife, Tzila, also had a child, or children, but she had a son named Tuval Cain. Tuval Cain was another one of these individuals who helped shape humanity with his invention. He invented weapons of war. So it's interesting, all these things in the origins stories in Torah are kind of connected. We're not going to go too deeply right now into all of those connections, but it's very there's a lot of parallels again between Rachel and Leah, Ada and Tzila. But Ada had her two sons, Yavel and Yuval, right, the father of tents and cattle, and the father of music, which, by the way, also parallels the tribes that Leah had. One of which is the tribe of Levi, who was the one who was the musical, the one who was mainly involved in music, right? And also there's other parallels with how we call Yoshev Oihu Mikne, who dwelled in tents and raised cattle. There's other parallels to some of the other sons of Leah, one of which being Yehuda, who is the progenitor of Mashiach, and the idea of Yoshev Oihel, right, says that Mashiach will be someone who learns Torah like his father, his ancestor David, right, who comes from the tribe of Yehuda, right, this idea of Yoshev Oihel, which was something that was a characteristic of Yaakov. Yoshev Oihel, in that context, in the context of Yaakov, the Jewish people, represents Torah learning, particularly as it relates to Mashiach, in terms of we're talking about in the broader sense with Torah learning and music. Mikne, which means raising cattle, is also related to the word for zaken, kana, to acquire. That it says in the Gemara, what is the definition of a zaken, of an elder? Zaken means elder, but the root of the word zaken is kana. So actually, the Gemara says zeh shekana chachma. So what is a zaken? It's not just a person who's old in age. A zaken is a person who's acquired wisdom. So kana. So Yoshev Oihu Mikne. The word we're using for that the Torah uses for raising cattle is mikne, which means also to acquire, right? That the idea of acquiring Torah knowledge. Zeh shekana chachma, someone who's an elder, is someone who's of any age who has acquired Torah wisdom. Again, there's a little aside just in the back. There's so much richness in the nature of these early stories, and I mean every story in Torah, but particularly in these origin stories of Torah. And here we're focused on the nature of music and his relationship with his brother, the tents and the cattle. Just suffice this, there's a lot of parallel things going on that are also woven into this story. So the Alter Rebbe brings out this idea of coming from a Mishnah in Shabbos, that it says Kol Balei Shir Yotzim B'Shir, that all, and the way the Alter Rebbe interprets it, all masters of song go out in song, and Nichnasim B'Shir, and enter in song. Right, which is a reinterpretation of, as we mentioned, of what the Talmud is teaching a law in Shabbos regarding animals and their collars, which the word is sher, which is very much the same letters as the word shir. So that's kind of Chassidus taking a deeper dimension of these words. So all who go out with a collar, in the simple meaning of the Talmud, is describing the law on Shabbos. All animals who are able to wear a collar or be led by a collar, and who are led back in from one domain into another. So this is significant, because when the Alter Rebbe in Chassidus is reinterpreting this, it's very important that we're talking about going from one domain into another. The domains of Shabbos are very important in regarding their in a spiritual sense. I mean, they're very important in terms of the basic laws of Shabbos. You have what's called a Reshus HaYachid, a private domain. And you have another domain which is called the Reshus HaRabim, which is a public domain, right? And there are other domains that are mentioned in the works of the sages and the laws of Shabbos. But in simple terms, going from a private domain into a public domain is considered a major change, a major status change. So a person is allowed to go from a private domain to a public domain on Shabbos. A person's animal is allowed to go as well, from the barn into the pasture, etc. Though pasture is not necessarily a public domain, but it may be a different domain, especially if the animal's brought to a public place where many animals pasture. But in spiritual terms, going from a private domain to a public domain it represents a complete transformation of perspective. Often Chassidus speaks about this idea of a private domain and a public domain being two completely different perceptions of reality. That a public domain is this idea of shus harabim, that there's a perception of a multitude, the perception of multiple dimensions of reality, of multiple, sometimes disparate aspects of the world. Whereas a shus hayachid is an awareness of the yichidus she'olam, of the unity of God in the world. And so going from one perspective is quite a radical shift. So this is represented, the Alter Rebbe talks about this idea that called yotzim b'shir, that all who go out in song, and that he describes the idea of any kind of elevation, any kind of growth or transformation happens through song. It's related to this law of Shabbos in the sense that it's a complete paradigm shift from one domain into another, whether it's from an intellectual domain, a physical domain, but regardless, as he points out, that every aliyah, kol aliyah, shechabelchin aliyah, any aspect of growth at all, ever existing in the entire universe, on any level, physical or spiritual, comes about through song. It's an incredible thing. And so we go from one status to another status. There needs to be the transformation, the movement has to be through song. And so we're going to come up with a couple of synonyms for song that enables us to understand how this works. It's going to enable us, in reverse, to understand a lot more about music. Because what is for someone who's going from one domain, let's say one perspective, one paradigm, to another, so what is the stage in between? What is that music, that glue that is taking from one to another? So another way of putting that is something called bittul. Bittul is nullification. So whereas, let's say, the earlier awareness, the earlier paradigm or perspective, that strong identification with it has an identity. Identity is the opposite of bittul. Bittul, nullification, is the idea of a loss or a nullification of identity, a moving outside of identity. When someone identifies with an idea, let's say, a perspective, an opinion, then they, in a sense, are stuck in that. And any other perspective cannot be really related to, except through the lens of that identity. So in order to relate to a completely new perspective, let alone to adopt a completely new perspective, there needs to be a complete nullification of that first perspective. And then here we are where we're holding in the mind where we started last week, where we're 6 lines from the top. Yavel, it's the right-hand column. Again, go to the sources on sunriserecords.com. And we'll be working on a translation of this over time. Eventually, be able to post that. Right now, here's the original copy of the Torah or from where it's taken from. So 6 lines from the bottom. There's right in the middle towards the left of the line. There's a period. This is like this, kamashal, like an analogy. Hagrayin hanizur ba'aretz. So the analogy we're going to use for this, a very physical analogy. It's a very powerful analogy of a seed that's planted in the earth. Shetzarech liyos nirkav ba'aretz, that it needs to disintegrate in the earth. Ve'achar yachol litzmayach mizeh harbe graninim. And in order for it needs to first disintegrate, and only afterward can it sprout many, many seeds. Right, from one seed creates a plant which contains many of those same seeds. So the interesting thing is that I'm not sure of how maybe biologists can get back to me in terms of how science views the disintegration of a seed. and in terms of the growth of the plant that comes out of that. But Chassidus sees it in a very powerful and clear way, a kind of miraculous way, that the seed completely disintegrates. There's not something in the seed itself that starts out small and grows. Actually, the seed completely disintegrates. The seed is simply a catalyst which causes the power of this, whatever of the earth, to cause whatever this plant that's represented by the seed to grow. So it's really the way Chassidus sees this process happening. It's a powerful analogy that the seed that exists before, which is a very hard and very present piece of material, completely disappears, completely disintegrates in order for there to be this exponential growth that happens into this plant, which now is producing a multitude of seeds, which goes on, right, in many, many stages, obviously. And then those seeds, if you have 1,000 seeds in a plant, whatever it is, each one will produce 1,000, and there's this incredible exponential growth. So this also relates to the spiritual growth through music is also exponential. So he continues to bring the nimshal, the analog. Excuse me. And so too above in a spiritual realm, with souls and angels, in order to have an elevation with an additional understanding, there needs to be first a nullification of the identity and the original understanding that it possessed. And so just like this physical seed has to disintegrate to create exponential growth in the plant, so too with a soul, right, which is one dimension of the spiritual reality, or an angel, which is another dimension of the spiritual reality. And these distinction between these two dimensions are very important also in our study of Chassidus and music, because as we'll learn in another mimer by the Alter Rebbe, which has another seminal point in this topic, is the idea of that the music of the souls and the music of the angels represent two different dimensions of music. Whereas souls represent the dimension of music which is vocal music, shir balpeh, shir bapeh, vocal, and malachim, angels, represent instrumental music, shir bakli, music with a vessel, with an instrument. So right now so it has to mention both of these because there's two different dynamics, right? That essentially, as we've learned in other places, that the song of a soul is a much more primary source in terms of a godly revelation, and the song of an angel has degrees, is much more related to the physical world, or as Chassidus will explain it, light and vessels. So the song of the souls, the vocal song, is related to light, and instrumental music, the song of the angels, is related to vessels, the containers which contain that light. So that's another tangent, and there's a lot of practical ramifications that come along with this, namely that soul music, so to speak, the music that comes from the heart, vocal music, is much more primal and has a much more powerful, visceral effect. Whereas instrumental music has coming less from the panemius, from the inner dimension, and coming by definition, being filtered through a vessel, which is an external thing. So its source is not as powerfully deep and fundamental, but nevertheless, we see the advantage of instruments. They have a much greater, let's call it radius of influence, right? Because as we know, a soul, an unamplified voice, right? It might be very emotionally affecting, but it's an instrument that can be loud, that can be transmitted in much, right? Let's say a microphone even, which is an instrument, can transmit that voice farther and louder, as we're experiencing with the technology, that we have might have a voice that's speaking, but you have the technology which is carrying it everywhere. Right? So each one has its advantage, each one has its disadvantage. They work together in the sense that we have music in the world, right? The combination of voice and instruments. And as far as we're concerned within this mimer, that by both of these dimensions, there's this idea of a complete nullification in order to have this new area of growth as a requirement by every single type of growth. And afterward, only when there's a nullification of the previous identity, are the soul or the angel able to become elevated to have a greater appreciation, a greater understanding. And when the Alter Rebbe says greater here, as we know from the context, we don't just mean greater in degree, right? A little bit more than before. But we're talking about a completely, is the analogy with the seed and the plant, is a completely exponential new paradigm of understanding. So those who are familiar with the Zohar, right, as the Alter Rebbe is presuming, those of us learning Torah, either we're familiar with the Zohar or we become familiar with the Zohar. But there's a description in the Zohar of the spiritual realms, of the Gan Eden Ha'elyon, the Gan Eden Ha'tachton, the higher Gan Eden, the higher Garden of Eden, and the lower Garden of Eden, which is peopled, so to speak, right? Is filled with souls and angels, right? And the revelation of the higher Garden of Eden is incomparably higher than that of the lower Garden of Eden, as spiritual as that is. So the Zohar describes a pillar that goes between these two realms. So the pillar represents this channel of nullification. In order to get from one realm, the lower Garden of Eden, which represents a certain kind of comprehension of godly revelation, in order to go from that to the higher Gan Eden, right, to graduate as a soul or as an angel to this completely new way of experiencing godly revelation, it needs to travel through this pillar. The pillar represents this nullification. V'zehu kol balei hashir yotzin b'asagasam v'nimshachem lalas l'mayla yedei hashir. This is what it means, that all those masters of song, meaning all those who possess song, yotzin b'shir nichnasim b'shir, they go out in their song. What does it mean? They go out of their understanding with this nullification, and they're drawn higher, al yedei hashir, through song. V'lachen b'shas harkarban, right? So therefore, at the time of before we get into this whole idea of the time to sacrifice, it's just this idea of this travel from a lower Gan Eden, higher Gan Eden through this pillar. This pillar is very important. The Zohar talks about that the pillar, as we're going to say a little bit later in the mimer, that the pillar is composed of 3 colors. And we're going to get into that, and then we're going to start to talk about, or in some versions, or in another part of Zohar, of 4 colors. And this is important because the nature of this transformation, the nature of this nullification, the nature of a song, which enables a person or a soul or an angel to travel and to transform, is not all created equal. There's different types of nullification. There's different ways in which we become disassociated from our former identity, as we're gonna get into a little bit, which is represented by the 4 colors. So now let's talk about the sacrifices in the temple. Right, every sacrifice had to be accompanied by song. V'lachin b'shas hakreves hakarban hayat tzarich lios gam ken shir. That's why in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy Temple, at the time of bringing the sacrifices, they had to be accompanied by song. It wasn't enough that the Kohanim were the ones that actually brought the sacrifices, the priests, led by the high priest, Kohen Gadol. Their avoda, their involvement was completely silent. And the Levium, who were outside of the area of the Azara, of the area of where the sacrifices were performed and sacrificed on the altar, they composed and performed the music. And it was that music that had to accompany the carbon. And there's differences of opinion in halacha. We appreciate that there's an opinion that the sacrifices were not kosher if they were not accompanied by song. And we even though there's an opinion that numerous sacrifices could still be kosher without the song, b'diavad, meaning after the fact. But we see from this that the ideal of the bringing of the sacrifice had to be with music, and here it says that it had to be, meaning this is they go hand in hand. The sacrifice, which is the idea of a transformation, is the burning up of the animal, which in Chassidic terms represents the animal soul, the ego, the separate self. It has to be accompanied by music. Because the idea of sacrifices is the idea of elevation, going from below to above, right? They're burned with fire. The nature of fire is below to above. Isha, reach nichayach, which is a fire that has a pleasant smell. Right? This idea of fire going from below to above, containing a pleasant smell. The pleasant smell is the idea of a transformation, of an elevation. And this requires this elevation of the animal, of the fire, carrying the spiritual nature of this transformation from below to above, needs song, bechinas bittul, kanal, which we're equating here with nullification, as we explained above. In order to be able to elevate. So the nature of a sacrifice is elevation, but in order to be able to elevate, you had to have the song. The song is the key to elevation. So this brings us to our practical message. We can see it in two ways. That in order for us to be able to grow in life, in order for us to be able to transform in life, our life has to be infused with song, has to be infused with music, a musical consciousness, if you will. Because not always are we carrying our instruments around with us. Not always is it even appropriate to hum a melody, though more often than not, it is. But a musical consciousness, which is a consciousness of simcha, of joy and confidence, enables us to grow. We need that openness. We need that that not being stuck in our ego. And ego is not necessarily a negative thing. Ego could be a very positive identity. We've worked hard to gain a certain understanding, a certain relation to reality. But in order to grow, then we need to be able to put that aside, to step outside of that with an open mind. And that's the idea of a musical consciousness. That's number one. And number two, another practical result of this, practical outcome, is how we look at music itself. Is the music that we're playing, that we're creating, is it enabling us? Is it enabling our listeners? Is it creating a reality that is taking us out of the moment? Right? And that's a good litmus test for good music. And people create music without any understanding of Chassidus, or obviously there's music that exists that accomplishes this, that it transports us. And this is a good litmus. Is our music really working? Is it flowing? Is it happening? Right? Is it coming from the heart? Is it taking us out of our current situation? And if it's not, maybe the mind one is overthinking it. So one needs to get out of the mind. It doesn't necessarily need to be a certain complexity of music itself. It's a certain attitude that I'm ready to open up. I'm ready for the music to take me away. I'm ready for it to carry me to a new place. It's not going to be a predictable place, right? The predictable music, dry or so cheesy music, right? Something that's overly identifiable and predictable can have this quality. It keeps us stuck in a previous paradigm. So even if we're playing a song note for note the same way it was played before, but we're playing it with that transformative spirit, then it still has that quality of transformation, of bittul, of nullification of our previous status. So we'll leave it at that. Just to say one final word, of course, to connect everything to Geula and the transformation from the world of exile, the world of Gullus, to the world of redemption, of complete redemption, is a complete paradigm change, and that requires music, which is why music is so important in this time, and as in every time, but specifically in this time. So we should increase in music, as we always say, right? With abundant singing and playing of music, we bring about the true and complete redemption. Thank you, and be safe and healthy. And those who need healing should have complete healing, and we should have a true and complete salvation.